This is an unabridged reading of Beyond the War of Thorns, Chapter 1, Part 3. Their exhaustion was overwhelming, and within minutes, Kondo, Tenox, Lao, and Shin were fast asleep. Aladrir and Lorius, however, were very much awake, and on high alert. The elf was quite more aware of the situation at hand than the others. They were being hunted. Aladrir had kept this knowledge to himself, but he was prepared to alert the group when the situation called for it. As a ranger of Silvermoon, he had mastered the ability to postpone his need for sleep for several days, and with his hunter training, he had honed his senses to detect any predator's movements, no matter how concealed they were. Also, with Lorius at his side, and with his feline night vision, no assassin should be able to reach them before they were cut down by a volley of arrows. The lynx had begun to growl, but suddenly it dropped its head to the ground and laid there as if it had fallen asleep. "Lorius, what's the matter?" asked Aladrir of his pet. "What's wrong?"
"Hush, pretty boy,"
whispered Dagon Dreadblade, as his daggers tore into Aladrir's back, interrupting the elf mid-sentence.
"You don't want to spoil the surprise."
The Forsaken added, as the hunter fell, mortally wounded, to the ground. Before losing all strength, though, the Blood Elf managed to fire a flare into the ceiling. The entire inn was brightly illuminated for several seconds, and the rest of the group was instantly awakened.
"What? No!"
shouted Kondo as he saw Aladrir's body lying bloodied on the ground. The Tauren immediately rushed towards Dagon in an attempt to push him away from the Cinderae. The fleet-footed rogue dodged the attack and dove away. "Mon, he be looking real bad," said Tenox as he approached Kondo, and could now see the full extent of Aladrir's injuries. "These will keep him alive for a little while longer," added the troll as he placed a totem with a small voodoo mask attached to it, and a snake-shaped totem next to the Blood Elf's body. "But if we don't get him to a proper healer soon, he gonna bleed out in a few minutes," he said as the small totems began to release blue and green particles respectively.
"I'd worry about the rest of you, shaman,"
said Dagon in a guttural tone.
"The elf's fate is sealed."
"Forsaken, how could you do this to a horde brother?"
added the Tauren, to which Dagon simply laughed. "These not be your horde brothers, Kondo," said Tenox, attempting to awaken the young Tauren to the reality of the situation. "Look around us! They be all around! They here to kill us, boy!" Indeed, they were surrounded. A multitude of rogues and assassins were packed into the Crossroads Inn. Not a civilian was in their bed. The innkeeper was nowhere in sight, and the entire town was without light. There was no mass exodus from the north. It was only the rogues, and in an instant, the mass of assassins swarmed the 5 rebels all at once. Several attackers rushed Kondo as he shielded Aladrir's body, but the Tauren used the side of his massive battle axe to swipe them all away. Dazed but not seriously injured, a goblin assassin jumped at Kondo from behind and drove both his daggers into the warrior's shoulder blades. "Oh!" yelled Kondo in pain, then grabbing the small assailant with one hand and throwing him through the inn's exit. The goblin simply maneuvered his body as he flew through the air and landed on his feet, looking up and grinning at the Tauren. "Oh!" grimaced Kondo as poisons from the goblin's blades began to attack his body. An orc jumped at the opportunity to finish the weakened Tauren, and she rushed in with hatchets in hand. But before she could strike, Tenox's lava-infused mace slammed into her face. The orc flew back several yards, where she writhed in pain as her face began to sizzle from the heat. "You can't be holding back, mon!" yelled Tenox, "or we all be dying tonight!" The troll then struck another opponent with both of his weapons, crushing the rogue's chest armor and sending him flying against the wall. "Come here, boy," added Tenox. "Be cleansed and help us survive!" Then, with a wave of his hand, the small totem started emitting particles once again. Immediately, Kondo felt relief from the vile toxins damaging his body, and he picked up his weapon once more. On the opposite side of the inn, Lao and Shin Yodapan had also begun to engage the onslaught of rogues. The 2 Pandaren were among the greatest monks of their generation, and every ounce of their skill would be put to the test that night. "Try again," mocked Shin as he effortlessly dodged Zuko's sword slash with a sidestep. "Too slow," he added as he ducked under the undead's second attack, placing the Pandaren in a perfect position for a counterattack. Before Zuko could react, Shin lunged with his bladed fist weapon, but before striking, the monk twisted his hand upwards and struck the Forsaken with the palm of his hand. The crunch of bones could be heard throughout the inn, and with the strike, Shin seemed to be filled with a faint aura of energy, as if his attack charged him in some way.
Thanks for the chi,
remarked Shin as Zuko's body flew across the room. Watch yourself, clown, snarked Melixia as she caught the nearly unconscious Zuko midair before his body crashed against the wall. You may be hard to kill, but don't press your luck. As another rogue attempted to jump on Shin from one of the ceiling's beams, the Pandaren transferred the newly attained energy into his foot.
Rising Sun Kick!
Shouted Shin as he backflipped into the air, creating a crescent-shaped flame streak as he kicked the attacker in the chest. The rogue's limp body landed several yards behind the Pandaren.
You're spilling perfectly good brew,
protested Lao as he blocked an assassin's attack with a small keg, and the liquid inside began to escape through the opening created by the dagger strike. Immediately after, the monk placed his mouth on the opening and began to drink furiously, not wanting another drop of brew to go to waste. Before the rogue could rally a second attack, the Pandaren spun his body around with the strength and power of an ox, and delivered a brutal roundhouse kick to the side of the enemy's head, all while continuing to drink from the small keg. The assailant immediately blacked out as his body went flying through the inn.
You want to taste as well?
Mockingly questioned Lao as 3 more assassins attempted to rush him.
Here then, enjoy!
The monk then launched the small keg at one of the attackers' heads. The keg burst open, and the remaining brew went flying around the room, spilling on several of the surrounding rogues. Lao inhaled deeply, and before any assassin could react, the monk unleashed a torrent of flames from his breath.
Yeah!
Yelled the flame-engulfed rogues as they sought relief from the fire. The attacker who was doused most heavily in brew was completely ignited, and he ran out of the inn and into the night, his cries dying out seconds later. Enough of you, fat Pandaren, said Melixia Nightborn, as she suddenly appeared behind Lao from a cloud of shadows and purple mist.
Cousin!
Yelled Shin Yodapan as he saw Melixia prepare to strike with a shadow-infused blade. Before the Blood Elf could attack, though, Shin quickly fired off a small spear with his left hand, which wrapped itself around Melixia's weapon. The Pandaren then pulled with great force, disarming the Sindore. Shin dashed through the inn, ready to slam his bladed fist weapon into the elf's face. Whoosh! Nothing. Shin's punch was only met with a dark cloud of mist as his enemy disappeared into the shadows. Guess you're the slow one now, jeered Melixia as she appeared behind Shin and drove her dagger into the Pandaren's side. The monk grimaced in pain, but quickly turned around to retaliate against the rogue.
You'll pay for that!
Yelled Shin with his face full of vitriol. The Pandaren lunged at the Blood Elf, attempting to connect a kick to his enemy's stomach, but the rogue once again stepped into the shadows before he could connect. Bold words for a clumsy fat oaf, said Melixia in a mocking tone while she surfaced from the shadows below Shin and sliced his calf muscle. I don't think I'll kill you, Pandaren, she said as she jump flipped over the monk, evading another one of his kicks. No, that would be too easy. I want you to suffer.
Scum!
Yelled Shin, becoming more frustrated with every attack the rogue evaded. I know, she said with an excited tone, as she effortlessly ducked under yet another punch. I've seen all your weak points by now, both physical and mental. I know exactly where to hurt you.
Shin!
Shouted Lao as he fought off another group of attackers.
Concentrate! She's toying with your emotions. She's using your own anger against you. You need to calm down and let the chi flow through you.
It's too late, Pandaren, Melixia jeered. I have him right where I want him.
Damn you!
Yelled Shin, carelessly attacking once again, and this time going slightly off balance as he missed. There it is, said Melixia as she appeared behind the destabilized monk. Now you'll forever be a prisoner in your own body. She finished as she drove her shadow-infused dagger through a small opening in the back of Shin's neck armor. The Pandaren's limp body instantly dropped to the floor.
Shin!
Yelled Lao as he leapt to his cousin's aid and swiped at Melixia with his staff. But the Sindore vanished again before the monk could make contact.
Are you alright, cousin?
Asked Lao as he prepared himself to defend his wounded relative from the rogues that surrounded them. I can't move my... whispered Shin with a feeble voice. A few yards from the Pandaren, Tenoch and Kando also continued their attempts to stem the tide of rogues. As several assassins rushed to the pair, Tenoch charged one of his weapons with pure lightning, which he then unleashed on the attackers. The lightning crashed against the group, killing 2 and disabling the rest.
Enough!
Yelled Kando as he slammed his giant hoof to the ground, momentarily stunning a different group of attackers.
Where do you think your evil will lead the Horde?
Asked the Tauren, still attempting to reason with the attackers. They not be listening, Kondo! Tanox was cut off mid-sentence as Dagon Dreadblade drove both his daggers through the troll. The impaled shaman dropped to his knees and gripped his torso where the daggers had penetrated.
No!
Shouted Kondo, but before he could reach Tanox, Dagon grabbed the troll's mane and placed a dagger to his neck.
Forsaken,
said Kondo, while keeping his distance from Dagon and Tanox.
Do you not remember when no one would give your kind refuge? It was the Horde that believed in you. My people believed in you. That you were not the monsters the rest of the world saw you as. But look at you now. Is this how you repay us?
Foolish cow,
laughed Dagon as he pressed his dagger on the shaman's skin.
We've never cared for you. You've always been tools to be manipulated by us. Death to the living.
Kondo's shoulders dropped, and his face became solemn as the optimism he had held firm to was crushed by Dagon's words. Words dripping with pure evil and malice.
Tanox,
said Kondo.
Forgive me. I had hoped to save my Horde brothers. I thought...
Don't you be worrying for me, Kondo, let out Tanox as his body struggled to stay alive. Keep on fighting for the Horde. The true Horde! And with those final words, Dagon sliced the troll's neck, ending his life.
Murder!
Roared Kondo, with a rage that echoed through the barrens. The warrior charged at Dagon and swung his battle axe with all his might, but the Forsaken dodged the attack and quickly disappeared into the mass of rogues. As Kondo was dislodging his axe from the fissure it had created in the floor, 5 assassins sought to surprise the Tauren.
You're all murderers!
Shouted Kondo as he quickly recovered his axe. The assassins miscalculated his speed and strength, and all were cut in half by the warrior's whirlwind of steel. Oh, I think he's mad! Jeered Zuko while swinging his sword at Kondo's head. With not a moment to spare, the warrior turned and managed to block the strike with one of his horns. With the strength of his whole body, Kondo lunged his head, slamming the side of his horns into Zuko. The undead was launched into a group of rogues.
Lawyers!
Shouted Kondo as he charged the group and unleashed a rampage of strikes. Zuko managed to duck and roll away from the Tauren, but the other rogues were massacred. Dagon caught Kondo's attention, and as the Tauren turned to strike, the rogue threw a handful of blinding powder in his face.
You have no honor!
Shouted Kondo as he swung his weapon wildly, cutting down 2 more assassins even while momentarily blind. Dagon managed to duck under the warrior's weapons and slice the side of his leg, but the rogue intelligently retreated early. The corrosive powder's effect on Kondo's eyes was limited, as his berserker rage was granting him pain tolerance beyond what most mortals could achieve. He would soon fully recover.
You played us for fools!
Shouted Kondo as Zuko attempted to strike again before the Tauren fully regained his senses. The Forsaken's mace struck Kondo's weapon as the warrior managed to just block the attack. Zuko did not relent this time, striking with his sword, then his mace, again and again. Other rogues also joined in on the melee, and Kondo blocked what he could. As more attacks damaged the Tauren's body, more rage built up inside of him. Like sharks in a feeding frenzy, the rogues did not realize that Kondo was reaching for his massive war totem with his right hand.
Never again!
Thundered Kondo as he swung the giant totem, impacting Zuko and several of the other attackers. Although a blunt weapon, the warrior swung his totem with such force that several rogues were ripped apart. Most of Zuko was launched against the wall. One of his legs flew into another assassin, and one of his arms flew outside of the inn.
Oh!
Grimaced Kondo as Dagon drove a dagger into his shoulder. The Tauren spun around as fast as he could, swinging with both his weapons, but once again the rogue was too quick as he retreated into a group of assassins. The warrior leapt at the group and came down with both weapons, delivering a raging blow to the rogues. All were either killed or incapacitated, but Dagon was not among the victims.
Gah!
Once again Kondo was struck, but this time Malixia was the culprit. As the warrior swung his weapons in retaliation, the Blood Elf stepped into the shadows and disappeared. Before Kondo could react, Malixia appeared above him and struck again.
Coward!
Shouted Kondo as he began to swing wildly, attempting to anticipate the rogue's movements. Malixia, however, was always one step ahead. The elf vanished once again and appeared behind the Tauren, ready to land a powerful shadow strike. Lorius had finally come to his senses and pounced on Malixia, biting deeply into the Sindore's shoulder. "Damn cat!" yelled Malixia as she grimaced in pain. Loria shook his head, attempting to tear the rogue's arm from her torso. Malixia let out an agonizing cry before she managed to concentrate enough to step into the shadows once more. Lorius was confused for a second, but then quickly dashed to Aladrir's side. The lynx furiously licked his master's face, attempting to wake him, but Aladrir was unresponsive. "So much for a peaceful night's rest," said Lao Yodapan as he laboriously walked Kondo's side while carrying his cousin Shin's body over his shoulder. Lao then cautiously placed Shin next to Aladrir and Tanox's bodies. "I see it's just you, the lynx, and myself for this final sparring session. Sadly, I am all out of brews, so I hope you still have much more fight in you, Kondo."
Are you alright, friend?
asked the Tauren in a concerned tone as he saw the damage the Pandaren had sustained. The monk was covered in his own blood, almost entirely from head to toe, and a handful of his bones were clearly broken, one protruding through the skin.
"Do not worry for me, young one," responded Lao. "This damage will not kill me, at least not soon. But we should hurry. We should end this fight as soon as possible."
Kondo nodded in agreement, and the two prepared themselves to face the remaining assailants. A total of 17 rogues surrounded them, including Daigon Dreadblade.
"Very well,"
Kondo remarked.
"Let's finish this."
The Tauren fell to one knee as he tried to charge forward. His head was spinning, and his body felt unresponsive.
"What's happening?"
"All it takes is one small cut,"
laughed Daigon as he held up a small shiv covered in dark green poison.
"and the victim will be rendered immobile within seconds. I used the whole dose on you, beast. The rest of you, finish off the Pandaren and the cat. The Tauren is mine."
The remaining rogues blitzed Lao and Lorius, striking with sinister intent and with all manner of weapons. The exhausted Lao fought valiantly, but he would not last much longer, and Lorius, with all his ferocity, would still be no match for that many assassins.
"All your strength, all your rage, but in the end you are still powerless,"
mocked Dagon as Kondo attempted with all his might to lift himself up. All the Tauren could achieve, though, was to sit motionless on one knee. At least he would die with honor, he thought.
"You will die now, Tauren, slaughtered like livestock, and your precious hoard will forever belong to our queen."
The Forsaken extended his arms, ready to eviscerate Kondo. Before he could strike, though, light rain began to fall outside, and the inn seemed to be filled with static electricity. Lao and the rest of the rogues looked around confused as the hairs on their heads and the fibers on their clothing began to stand on end. A giant lightning bolt was unleashed from outside the inn, striking Daigon and sending him crashing through the building's wall.
"Rise, heroes of the Horde!"
shouted a thundering voice, and a figure began to emerge from the mists. The figure materialized into an old Tauren shaman, who then extended his right hand towards the two remaining rebels, and unleashed the chain of blue water-like particles that struck Kondo and then bounced to Lao. Suddenly, Tanox's totems also became active for a few more seconds, as if the troll was sending aid one last time from the spirit realm. Kondo felt the poisons leave his body, and his strength returned to him. Lao's injuries began to close and heal, and even Lorius's injuries began to disappear. Shin, however, was still unable to move. He lay paralyzed on the floor as tears poured from his eyes.
"Your tyranny ends now, assassins,"
assured the shaman as he entered the building. The Tauren's fur was grayed, and one of his horns was broken in half, but despite his aged appearance, the power emanating from his eyes and hands was anything but diminished. A couple of rogues managed to escape through the hole in the wall created by Daigon's body, but most were not so fortunate. Kondo immediately charged the remaining rogues, crushing one enemy's head with his totem and cutting another in half with his axe as his onslaught continued once again. The rest of the assassins then dispersed, with several rushing to attack the old shaman, recognizing the threat the Tauren represented.
"Not so fast!"
shouted Lao as he began to lean back, stretching his arms out as if he was drawing large amounts of potential energy into his body. As the rogue turned to face the Pandaren, Lao shot forward at him, slamming his head against the attacker's skull, instantly killing him. Additionally, the impact was so powerful that it sent a small shockwave throughout the town, momentarily stunning the other assassins. Lao then jumped in the air, spinning around multiple times and kicking two additional attackers in the face, sending their unconscious bodies flying. The old shaman turned to his remaining attackers and released a powerful lightning strike, which instantly fried one of the rogues. The chain of lightning then twisted and turned as it struck 4 more attackers, electrifying them to death as well. The old shaman pushed his right hand forward at one other rogue, and then did the same with his left hand at a second assassin, sending a volley of fiery sparks at his targets and lighting them on fire. Cried the attackers as the old shaman's hands began to generate molten lava. Then at once the Tauren launched the liquid at the pair, completely drenching them in fiery lava. Their bodies withered to molten ash on the building's floor. Lorius jumped on one of the remaining rogues' back, tightly gripping his jaw around its neck. The lynx then thrashed its head and ripped at the assassin's flesh. With one last powerful bite, Lorius severed the rogue's spinal cord.
"You will not escape, honorless scum!"
shouted Kondo as he saw the last rogue attempting to run to safety through the inn's door. The Tauren then lifted his battle axe, squinted his eyes as to sharpen his aim, and launched his weapon at the assassin. The massive axe struck the rogue, splitting his skull, nearly slicing his head completely in two.
"Follow me, friends,"
said the old Tauren when all the rogues had been dealt with.
"Bring your fallen friends."
Kondo and Lao quickly picked up their 3 fallen companions' bodies and carried them out, just as the mist began to dissipate. Lorius followed closely behind, purring at his master in the hopes of waking him.
"Here, friend!"
called the voice of a young female Tauren shaman as she waved at Kondo and Lao. The 2 rebels then placed their 3 companions on some tarps in front of the young shaman, who began to examine the bodies. "Oh dear," said the young female Tauren as she saw the extent of the wounds on the 3 rebels. "I hope you are not too far gone." She then placed the horned totem on the ground, which started to pulse waves of mystical water all around the group. Kondo, Lao, and Lorius were miraculously healed of any remaining injuries, but the other 3 remained still.
"How are they, Hina?"
asked the elder Tauren as he approached the group, having just finished surveying the area for any further threats. "I was not able to heal them, grandfather," she responded. "I fear the troll and the elf are too far gone, and the Pandaren has been wounded by very powerful dark magic."
"The spirits speak to me,"
responded the old Tauren.
"The troll has completed his walk in this life.
Kondo shook his head with a mix of rage and sadness.
But the other 2, I will do what I can to bring them back."
The shaman then lifted his hand to the heavens, and his eyes began to emit lightning. Clouds then started to gather above the group in the night sky, and rain followed. Kondo and Lao eagerly looked on, and Lorius frantically licked Aladrir's face.
"Come now, brothers,"
spoke the old Tauren with a thundering voice as he looked at the fallen warriors.
"Let the spirits guide you back to this land,"
he said as a flash of green and white light shot out from the mouths of the fallen rebels. The light then dissipated to reveal Aladrir sitting up, confused as to where he was or what had happened. Shin brushed the palm of his hand against the back of his neck, feeling that the wound Malixia had caused was completely healed. The Pandaren let out a sigh of relief and slowly rose to his feet. "Easy, boy!" shouted Aladrir as Lorius excitedly jumped on the recovered blood elf.
"Spirit Walker,"
said Kondo, astonished at what he had witnessed.
"we are eternally in your debt. Who are you? Why did you come to our aid?" "Patience, young one,"
replied the old Tauren.
"I am Ashak Cloudweaver, and this is my granddaughter, Hina Wolf Cloudweaver. I know you have many questions, but for now we must leave this place and reach safety. We can talk in the morning once you are all rested." "Yes, Elder,"
said Kondo. The warrior then kneeled down next to Tanox's body and paused for a second, as if praying under his breath. The rest of the group followed suit and gathered around their fallen companion as well. Finally, Kondo lifted the troll's body and placed it on his shoulder, and the group walked off into the night.